But you did have this really interesting graph a lot of interesting graphs in the book. But this one that I really liked, which compares the housing supply, getting to housing, I'm sort of skipping ahead, to the change in population. So, like, as the number of people increase, so you have New York and LA and SF, and Seattle is a lot more people. And then you have places like Austin where there's a lot more people, 20 plus, more than 20% increase in population, but then a pretty big increase in housing supply too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Look at
you
all those places they can live.
exactly. So then there's incredible all these places like LA and San Francisco. As the populations have changed, they have
Yeah.
not increased the actual supply of housing.
That's right. And so elasticity is, and I won't get into the economic details of that, but it's a measure of how responsive your housing supply is. And so the quadrants on the right are places that have grown very rapidly. And so Charlotte, North Carolina has grown almost as rapidly as Seattle has over the last decade. But they've built a whole bunch of housing in response. As a result, their rents have stayed lower. Their vacancy rates, which is the number in the parentheses there, the 6.5% is their vacancy rate, and those vacancy rates have stayed higher. And so ultimately, they've created a more accommodating housing market, and they have not had the housing crisis that we've had in the lower right quadrant, which is the perfect storm for homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Rapid population growth and not building enough housing, and that's Boston, San Francisco, and Seattle. And
Right.
so, that is, what I say to people when I put this chart up, and I said, if you find yourself in the bottom right part of that graph, you're going to have a housing crisis.
Yeah.
And there's going to be homelessness associated with that. And so while it's tragic, it shouldn't surprise anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's sort of proof right here. And yet then you have, this big question of like, well, what kind of housing? And for me, I'm always approaching the question of, oh, we just have more housing on the market. You look at places like New York, these luxury condos, staying vacant, or here in LA as well, and all over the place. It's like the kind of housing really does matter. So maybe talk about this, like what has to happen in addition to more housing?
Yeah, that's a great point. So a lot of people say to me, well, Greg, you're just saying more housing helps us. And if we build luxury condos, will that solve homelessness? The answer to that question is no. I will say, and I say this to developer colleagues in Seattle, is we still need more housing. We need more market rate housing. And so build away, do it, because we have a lot of people in this community who can't find housing, even at higher ends. What we need is more housing at all levels. And so what we should do is create an environment in which a lot of market rate housing can be built, and that should be denser. It should be multifamily. We shouldn't just be building single family homes. And then we need middle income housing. We need workforce housing. We need affordable housing, and we need supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. And as you move down the income ladder, there is a role for the public sector in ensuring that housing can be built that's affordable for people who have lower incomes. And so I say it's kind of like an exam. It's always E or D, all the above. Like we need housing at all those levels. And if we think that only market rate housing can fix this, we're fooling ourselves. And therefore, there is a role for the government to make sure that there's housing that's affordable. I mean, the minimum wage is $15 in Seattle, full time. That's $30,000 a year. You can't afford $2,000 rents on $30,000 a year, and therefore, I always say to folks that I think there's a credible role for the government here, and the government's been involved in housing for a long time in the United States, since the 1930s, and ultimately that needs to happen because the math doesn't work for the private market to build housing that's affordable for folks who are earning those kinds of incomes and below.
But also the question of market rate. My question, like for you guys, how much did you study like the actual real estate market? Did you factor that into the lobbyists, the money they have, the power they have, which I think is really hamstrung. I mean, it's completely hamstrung our political process here in California. We can't get rent control to save our lives. I mean, it's just like every single time they pull out all the stops and we defeat it in one way or another, expanding, a protection of any kind of rent control. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the way the housing market has been allowed to just kind of run amok?
That's right. That's right. I mean, there are powerful interests, and frankly, single-family homeowners are arguably one of the most powerful blocks when it comes to very localized decisions around housing. And so, and I always say I live in a single-family home, and so I'm not disparaging all people who live in single-family homes because I happen to live in one, but I'm pointing the finger at myself as well. But over the last 50 years, single-family homeowners have been very reluctant to allow multifamily housing to be built in their neighborhoods, and especially multifamily housing that's designed to serve people with low incomes. And so we've got a long legacy all around the country of very, very exclusionary practices. And so We're now starting to see in California and Oregon and Washington and on the West Coast some changes. They're small, but there are interests who have had a pretty good run for the last couple generations that are not that excited about these changes, and that's what you're exactly talking about. And so it is a political challenge to change zoning, to change permitting, to change the way we think about our cities, and to make them more accommodating for more folks. And like a lot of major social change, it can be difficult because for the people for whom this has been a good run, they're reluctant to make those changes. So you're exactly right. And that's why I think a lot of the housing policy changes that most people would say, this makes a lot of intuitive sense.
Mhm.
For example, Washington, we just tried to upzone around transit, meaning you got light rail coming through. Why wouldn't we build a whole bunch of housing around there? And we had Republicans and Democrats vote against that. And that was a huge frustration for a lot of people in our state because it would have been an easy win and an easy way to create more housing that was more accessible to more folks. And so it's hard work. It's hard work, but we have to keep doing it.
We have this Senate bill in California to create more multifamily, like homes and neighborhoods, and you've got like all these all these cities suing, who are they're suing over that bill. Like, how dare you create like multifamily units and homes in my neighborhood? And that's the other thing. Like, I don't know about you, Katrina. Like, I rent, and
Yes.
you know, this is the renters have no fucking political power whatsoever. And yet we make up, I don't know, the numbers, like disproportionately, we're a lot of renters out there, but we don't have any say. When you finally own a home, then you're supposed to just like sick it on all your neighbor. You just turn around and
Mhm.
become this like evil villain
That
who's just
hates everyone that like
yeah,
needs to live in an apartment. Well, I was thinking when you were talking about market price and these multi-level homes, it's like I've multiple times in LA accidentally tried to get into an apartment that I make too much money as a single person to be in because that's my budget. So
right,
like what is the different, like I see multi-level homes go up and I'm happy, but I'm jealous because that's what I can afford. But I am
you're not a
not
family.
down enough. I need to like mess up and have like 2 children out of wedlock so that I can afford rent, basically, is what would help me. Like
Do you mean
I
to like qualify?
Yes, to qualify. Like I,
Mm,
as a single person, do not qualify for the housing in LA that is technically in my budget. And if I lucked out, I'm in a rent controlled place right now. Everyone I know in LA that's in a rent controlled place will be there until they die. And I'm lucky where a lot of people get pushed out. They'll be the
right.
last person in their unit and they're actively not getting maintenance, not getting, you know what I mean? Because they
Yes.
know they're the last person paying not even $500, like just paying a decent amount of rent, but they know as soon as they get out, they can double it.
Right.
So, where is it for us, these people that like, I hate to try to advocate for myself where there's still people that can't pay rent at all, but it's like, there are a bunch of people in the middle that we can't pay rent either, or
Right.
barely can,
Right.
or whatever it looks like. I don't know. So, market, how is there a way for, like you were saying, Francesca, for it not to just be like, I own this building and this is how much you have to pay to live everywhere. Like them just even communicating and being like, well, like gas stations where it's like, well, if we all make rent insane, they will have to pay it from one of us kind of thing. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I do think there's a lot more organizing that's been happening, especially post-pandemic. I think the extension of like here in California of the eviction moratorium is good, but when that comes slamming down and we don't really have a solution for it, I mean, yeah, I think it is really important to see. I'm always struck. I used to live in San Francisco, and I'm always struck by this. Like, you see people who are homeless, unhoused folks they clearly have jobs. Clearly have jobs. Some man, he's got his cat on his leash. Cat is waiting outside of his tent, and he's like cleaning his tent as the cat is just waiting for him. And you just like that kind of shit where you're like, yes, there's mental illness. Yes, there's drug addiction within unhoused communities. But like, there's also people who have 9 to 5s who can't afford to live wherever the hell else they have to be because they're like dishwashers and they got to get up and be there at 5 in the morning. And like, just watching this man like calmly clean out his tent, I was like, that would be me. Like, that's my
Oh,
life,
yeah.
being like, I need to make sure my tent is clean. Ramona, you stay there on your leash.
Yes.
Like, let's make sure this is good. Like, it was
Is
just
is that
very
telling that we as working people have like fully already envision the kind of unhoused person we would be, because I've
Yeah.
also done this. I'm
A
like, oh, I know
germaphobe.
how I'm gonna acclimate. I know if this goes down, and because even the joke, or not the, my mom says it, like, not a joke, but just the saying that a lot of Americans are 2 paychecks away
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
that anyway, and just being like, dude, I know exactly what I would have to do if it went down. I'm selling the last of this stuff. I'm going back into my car. Like, I know what's up. Like, we all have
Right.
the plan.
What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do it.